Welcome to the channel if you're new here, welcome back if you're not. In this video we're going to be talking about focal length and lens compression, or more properly, perspective compression, what it is, why it happens, and how we can use it to enhance our videos. Now the main thing that focal length will change within your footage is your lens compression, or what should probably more properly be called perspective compression, but we'll be using lens compression for this video because it's the most common and readily understandable term. And what that is the relative distance between different aspects of your frame. If you look at this shot of my friend Cody, you'll see that it's shot with a 16mm wide angle lens, so it's a very wide angle photo really close to my subject. And you'll see that his nose is very big in comparison to his ears. Whereas if we pull back and zoom into 100mm, you'll see that the relative distance between his ears and his nose is much smaller. Therefore, they look much more balanced and what's called compressed in comparison to one another. Now, what is actually happening within this frame is we're changing what's called the relative distance between different aspects of our footage. When we're really close up to Cody's face, his nose in relative terms is way closer to the camera than his ears, whereas in relative terms, when we back up and zoom into 100mm, his nose relative to his ears is not that much closer to the camera. When the camera is like 8 inches away from his face, and his ears are about 12 inches away from his face, that is a big difference. Basically, his ears are 50% farther away from the camera than his nose. Therefore, his nose looks a lot bigger within the frame than his ear. It's like if you go outside on a sunny day and you go to block the sun, your hand just doesn't cover it enough, so you pull it closer. And what you're doing is you're changing the size of your hand relative to your light or the sun. Whereas when we pull back and zoom into 100mm, the relative distance between his nose and the camera goes from being 50% to like 5%, because we're backing up to like 15 feet, zooming in, and so 4 inches on top of 15 feet is a lot less compared to 4 inches on top of 8 inches. So it's not a 50% difference, it's more of like a 5 or 1, I don't even know, I didn't actually do the math, but it's significantly less of a difference than when you're close up in a wide angle lens. Now if we leave the camera in the same spot as the 100mm and then zoom the frame out to 16mm, you'll actually have the same amount of compression that you had with the 100mm. The 100mm is not actually adding compression, it's just zooming in so you have a sharper, more detailed image for that compressed shot. You have a closer frame to your subject. Notice also the background in relative distance. Cody is about 10 feet away from the background. Now, compared to the 8 inches that the camera is away from his face with the wide angle shot, that is really far. Whereas if we back the camera up to 15 feet with the 100mm lens, you'll see that the background becomes much larger in comparison to his face than in the 16mm shot that was close up. And that's the same thing have to do with the relative distance. The background is no longer 10 times as far from the camera as his face. It's now only about twice as far from the camera as his face is. Therefore, the relative distance becomes much smaller. Now, why is it important to know this and know how to use this? It's because when we're doing filmmaking, we are mimicking what the eye sees. In this shot, I'm talking to you about 18 to 24 inches away. This is about the distance that I would stand there and talk to a friend of mine. I wouldn't be talking from across the room to a friend of mine. This would be the same relative distance and therefore lens compression that you would have from me to you and you to the background. So this gives a very natural, sort of friendly look to it. This is basically mimicking the eye and what we would see if we were just talking face to face as friends. Whereas if we pull the camera back like this shot of Cody and zoomed in and got a more compressed image, this more mimics, say, if you were at a conference looking at the subject on stage from about 20 feet away, and that's the sort of feeling that it gets. That's why when you're doing like a business interview with a CEO, you're pulling the camera back and sort of zooming in to get sort of that same compression as if he was like talking to his board of directors or to his employees. You don't want to be right up on him because you're trying to give him an almost unapproachable, like it is more difficult to get close to him because he is in authority over you. That's why we shoot interviews with a compressed lens. We don't shoot them normally with a wide angle lens or even something like a 24mm equivalent that I have on this camera. So when you're thinking about how to frame a shot and how to frame a person within your shot, think about that. What are you trying to do? What is the message that you're trying to convey? Are you trying to make it feel like you're standing back and looking at someone, or are you trying to make it feel like the person is right up on you? I heard Devin Graham talking in a podcast about this, and he uses an 11mm lens on a full frame camera for almost everything. And that is because he wants people to feel right up on the action. He doesn't want to make it feel like you're watching him do tricks. He wants to make it feel like you're doing tricks with him. And so he goes with a wide angle lens to give that same perspective compression or lens compression as you would get if you were like skateboarding or running with him. Whereas if you look at photos of like a football game, you'll see that the relative distance, the compression is much greater, and it makes you feel like you're in the stands watching a football game. But if you look at football movies on the other hand, where they want you to feel as if you're in the action running around with the players, then they use a wider angle lens and get right up on the players so you feel like you're being brought through the film. So it feels like you're going through a play and making a touchdown with the player. So when you're setting up a shot and picking your focal length, for one, never zoom in with your lens. Always zoom with your feet. Pick your focal length for the look that you're trying to achieve. Try and figure out what is the best perspective. What is your audience? What does your audience need to see? How you want your audience to feel in relation to your subject. You might want to pull back and make someone feel small in comparison to their background. Make them feel like you're sort of watching them and pitying them. Or you might want to choose a wide angle lens, get right up on someone so that it feels like they're larger than life and powerful. But you could also go the other way and use telephoto lenses to make someone feel unapproachable, or you can use wide angle lenses like I am right now to mimic how you would see it if you were, say, a fan looking at it. Now, another thing that focal length does is that the tighter the lens, the more telephoto the lens, the shallower the depth of field would be at the same aperture if you look at the 16mm at f2.8 as opposed to the 100mm at f2.8. Even when you zoom in with the 16mm, you will see that there isn't the same shallow depth of field, and so using a more telephoto lens can give you a shallower depth of field, therefore isolating your subject from the background and giving a little more separation. This is used so often, I don't really feel like I need to go into this because depth of field is covered so much all across YouTube, but if you'd be interested in a video about depth of field and how to use it, let me know down in the comments section. Now, I hope I explained the what, why, and how well enough for you to be able to implement it. Whether you understand why it happens is immaterial. All you really need to know is what happens and then how to use the different focal lengths to get the different looks and invoke the feelings that you want your audience to feel. If you found this video helpful, please give me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and I'll see you all in the next video. By the way, I recorded this entire thing, almost the entire thing, and I forgot to plug in my mic. Don't forget to plug in your mic. It's really important.